And thank you all for coming. And I mean that sincerely. You know, I was going to put on a gorilla suit to make people in. My name is Loncharich. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Writing and Linguistics at Georgia Southern University, where I teach professional and technical writing. So what does that have to do with visual literacy? I am nominally a visual rhetorician. That is, I'm interested in visual information and making and sharing visual knowledge, but not within an aesthetic, but rather I'm interested in the ways that that information persuades and informs and moves people to action. It's not that I discount beauty, it's just that I'm coming at the visual from a little different angle. And what I want to talk about today specifically is a kind of writing form as I identify it in everyday life. This project in my research, like a lot of good things in my life, originated with my wife. So, and that's her, that's representation. She has this practice of, well, she likes it when I bring her long stem flowers, because she likes to trim them and arrange them. And I was watching, and I like to do things that she likes, because that's good, I'm good. I was watching her do this one day in my professorial way, where she does things and I walk around and sit around and think, because I'm being paid to think, I guess. And I was watching her arrange these flowers. I've seen her do this many times, and I know that she has no training in this. It's not a formal thing. And it's not done for any particular occasion. It's not like people are going to come over and there'll be this flower arrangement. So I asked her, you know, where did you get this? What compels you to do this? So I watched my mother do it, and I watched my aunt do it, her sister, with whom I'm very close. And so I watched her a little further and I began to see a kind of sense of community in this. As if there's sort of a long line of gendered amateur flower arrangers going back who knows how long. This constitutes a kind of abstract community of gender flower writers. Because I identify this is going to be an artful practice, but I also identify this as an arrangement of information, visual information for meaning, which could also be writing. I think that some of the things that my wife gets from this practice is that it helps build a sense of identity. When she walks into a room and sees these flower arrangements, she is reminded, at many levels, of her mother and her aunt, and by some kind of abstract connection, people that she may not even know. And I understand that, by looking at some other situations like this, that we make and share knowledge with each other in ways that construct community, and that reinforce us, and that remind us of who our people are, and then at the same time remind us of ourselves. Does that make sense? Anytime I'm not making sense, feel free to make a funny face. So again, what does this have to do with writing? Well, in my stuff, in the writing world, writing is inscription. It's a material change that within a symbolic system of representation that is informative. When we scratch on paper with a ballpoint pen and deposit those particles of ink on fiber, we are inscribing. And out of watching my wife inscribe, in a way, by moving flowers, shape and form and color around, it connects to a lot of things that I work with, which is rhetoric, that persuading and informing thing, genre, which is a different genre than you may have encountered. Sense of community, identity, of visual literacy, because these are practices that are shared. This is that sharing and making knowledge kind of thing. And composition, both composition in the artful sense, but also that horrible composition that you had to take as freshmen in college that we all loathe. that actually did horrible damage to that word, but composition is still the arrangement of information of meaning, no matter where you put it, whenever it happens. And activity, which is another theory that some of us writing folks with. So, that writing thing is inscription. The idea of writing has been around for a long time. And there are several competing theories about when it started and how it started. But in general, it's somewhere around Sumeria, which is current Syria, Iraq. Somewhere like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years ago. And there are these clay tablets and people drew pictures. Eventually those pictures became not pictures, but marks that had abstract meanings. Well, there's a person named, and her name is Denise Schmand-Besserat. I have a strange name, but if my name was Schmand, I would never marry Besserat, you know. But she's quite brilliant, and she's found thousands upon thousands of ceramic tokens in Syria and Iraq that she identifies as the proto-writing. What she argues about these tokens is that they're doing abstract work related to commerce. So if you have 30 sheep and you want to trade or barter your 30 sheep and you only have X number of digits, how do you convey that information? How do you convey the difference between male sheep and female sheep? Perhaps they're valued differently. Or lambs, or sheep of a different color. Are sheep worth more if they're pregnant, or are they worth less if they're shown? So these are kinds of abstractions that just can't be conveyed with our fingers and toes. So that's where these tokens come. And then these tokens can be combined in these kind of vessels to make these elaborate kinds of meaning. And there's thousands of them. She's identified this complex, interconnected system of token information transfer. And it's all about commerce. In fact, all of these theories about writing are about commerce. To which I say, phooey. I mean, we know that there's more to the human experience than commerce. We're standing in this wonderful place, really, that's predicated to that idea, dedicated really to that idea. This is foundational to art museums, that it's not just about trading for gain. So one of the things that this kind of proto-writing does not do, that our current alphabetic system and even our pictorial systems do very well, is tell stories. So where are the stories in this? And I can't believe that out of all of these records, that there is no personal narrative, there is no family history. There's none of the work that my wife's flower arranging is doing. It astounds me. So I would say that at that time, there's still the storytelling, the oral storytelling tradition, but there are also stories contained within everyday objects. And that's still the case today. We imbue objects with meaning. And so we need stories, not just for entertainment purposes, but for solving problems and for helping each other make our way in the world. These are useful and undeniably important things. Am I still making sense? Because it looks kind of like your eyes are glazing over. Sort of. When I said that we view things with meaning, I have a hammer that I'm pretty sure belonged to my grandfather. And I know it belonged to my father. And I am by no means a handy person. I watch my wife arrange flowers and stand there and dream about it, So, but when I pick up that hammer, it sets off this electric firestorm, if you will, semantic firestorm of semiotic associations. Because my grandfather held that hammer. His DNA, through his sweat is in the hammer. And my father held that hammer when he, according to a story, fell off a barn roof while he was helping somebody. And he held that hammer while he built a dormer on a house that I lived in my early childhood. My brothers held that, my uncles, hopefully someone other than a male gender held that sometime. So I know that there are stories. And part of what I'm talking about is we combine objects in ways, not unlike what Schmidt, Basseret's people were doing, to inform us in the way that my wife's flowers inform us, or inform her. So, kind of what I'm talking about, another instance that I realized in this is picture frames on a fireplace mat is one way to think about this kind of visual composition in everyday life. So let's say you have a fireplace, lucky you, and there's never very much room on these things. And many people line up their favorite images and frames on them. Our family members, our children, places we've been. So maybe your favorite image is that picture of Cancun. And it's not the smallest image, so it can't go in the front. And it's not the largest, so it really can't dominate view from the rear. It's just that in between it's obscured. Perhaps it's obscured by those framed images of Uncle Buddy, and then another of Aunt May. So how do you accommodate this? How do you establish a hierarchy of information? How do you bring the image that you want to the front? And how do you negotiate these social meanings? Both Uncle Buddy and Aunt May were miserable people in real life, and they loathed each other. We can't have them meet. We make these complex arrangements often without even really thinking about it. We accommodate and we compromise. And eventually we find a way to get 3/4 of our Cancun image up there. All of this is tied, and most of us know about this, is the Gestalt principles of visual perception, wherein considerations like contrast and proximity and continuity, closure, inform us. The world, our visual world is comprised of patterns, according to Gestalt, and we recognize these patterns, and that's how we find our way. So, what is this? What do you see? Oh, come on. So, but these are also really just shapes. These are really just blobs. We assign meaning to this because they are recognizable shapes. And that each individual bird shape is repeated. So this is the thing that we see. You drive along the highway, and oh yeah, birds underway. At the same time, it's just blobs and a horizontal line. If we change this, if we make just one move, we've now added a social dimension. We've assigned our social understanding to that Gestalt. So what is this story?
It's either the outcast or the male looking at 3 females. I don't know.
It could be the leader and his students or her students.
It could be, but this distance has meaning. This difference has meaning. Right? I prefer to think of it as a sample bird, that's all that, but I've never heard it put quite like it's the stud male bird in his harem. I've never heard it. And in this wonderful image that Dorothy Lang composed, we see the same thing. We see that same social separation. Using another Gestalt, rather than proximity, contrast is singling out this individual and isolating him from the crowd. I argue that we make these same kind of socially informative moves with objects in everyday life. So I'm going to talk a little about theory. Leah Powell was one of my people in grad school, so if she ever shows up with my presentations, I want to make sure I got that covered. She's a formidable person. And just not to be reductive, but much of what critical theory or art theory or writing theory really is that. It's just a story to help us understand. So many times we dress it up and make it difficult because it's important, but we're still telling stories. One of the stories that writing people, in particularly technical writing, use is genre. So when we think of genre, we may think of movies. There's science fiction movies, there's dating movies, romantic comedies, there's slasher movies. We may think of art types, watercolors, landscapes. Those are really just kind of containers for information. This kind of genre is rhetorically informed because it asks really, what is the purpose? What is the persuasive and informative purpose of those containers? And in this kind of genre, it's people doing things, and the text or the film or the art that results is really more like an echo of the action. So one example that I use of this is the job application form. This is something that we recognize. Genre is a response to a recurrent rhetorical situation. And so if you're applying for a job and you've done that before, you know what to do. You know beforehand even what information you're going to have to provide. It fills a social need. Not just the need of an employer to get people, but the need socially and culturally for us to be productive, gainfully productive, and to be working together. And the job application form has these recurrent features that help us recognize a rhetorical situation, which is your name, your social security number, your sad employment history, and space in which to fabricate more of our story. My wife's flower arranging. I understand the genre, but I couldn't really research that easily because there are formal genre, there are formal flower arranging instructions, instructive practices. There's FTD, there's this giant commercial industry about flowers. So, and I really don't have access to people's homes in a way that tells me that, yes, you did arrange that flower. And it's the same thing with picture frames, really. So that's an example of genre social action. We wave at someone, and they wave back. We see our friend across the street, and we wave, right? And we wave like this. We don't go like that. We don't complicate this in a way so it's not familiar. And if we see our friend, we don't shake our fist. If someone did that, how would you respond? We would be unclear. But a wave, we understand. So, I'm sorry. Let me go on with theory a little bit. Another theory that I want to talk about a little bit is activity theory. And basically what that is as we make marks on the world's making marks on us. We learn by going outside of ourselves. This comes from Vygotsky, and of you education folks, is that we are transformed internally by our objectives and goals and manipulation of the external world. And then activity theory is these horrible little triangles where the subject is the human, and the object is the world, and the mediating artifact is a tool. And the really nifty thing about this, though, is that if I go back, these pencils that the world and whoever that poor person is, who's having their brain splattered, is the tools change too. So I made this PowerPoint presentation. And I'm transformed. I'm slightly better at making PowerPoint presentations and hopefully delivering them. And the outcome is changed. I changed the world a little bit by making this. And the tool, PowerPoint as a tool, as an artifact, is ultimate. Not the specific code, but when I go to PowerPoint again, it's just slightly different. So if I use PowerPoint a lot, it becomes a lot different over time. Does that make sense? Okay. So, rather than flowers, which are much nicer, I arrived at garage workbenches, which is the site of another gendered kind of writing practice. My grandfather had a garage workbench. My father had one. My brothers have garage workbenches, and they are all remarkably similar. And yet they're all very different. The tools on them are unique to my grandfather, my father, my brothers. I have one, sort of. There's nothing on it. It's the academic workbench. Well, one of the cool things about this workbench model, this typified form, genre form, is that pegboard, because that's a writing surface. And for those of us who've done graphic arts, it's a grid. It tells us the relationship between objects, shapes, forms. And it also sort of models a lined notebook paper. You just go horizontal. Notebooks are grids, they just don't show you the vertical lines. So this is one of the things I research. And I look at it as genre. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple and how this connects to identity and community. There's a garage. Isn't this sexy? You saw the flowers and you thought this is just going to be this sort of kind of gorgeous thing. Now we're mucking about in somebody's garage. This is a rather impressive garage workbench. In fact, it's huge. It's almost the whole width of at least a 2, possibly 3-car garage. And I made a little graphic to account for the perspective, the skew in perspective. And we can see a high level of organization. Tools arranged by function and by shape. There's a real effort to maintain horizontal rows and to group things. Hammers spaced the same way, and drills spaced that same way. It's very tight. But another thing about this is that it's vast. There's all of this empty space. It's much bigger than what this person actually needs. It's as a display, it's really quite impressive. And one of the things it's displaying is capability. This is really announcing that I can use a hammer, and the drill, I can use a drill. And I've done that. And that saw thing, and look, there's a caulk gun, and I had that whole caulk thing going on. These are declarations about the person and about what they can do. This is also a connection to a community of workbench builders and users. My grandfather, my father, my brothers, they constitute admittedly a narrow and gendered community. But my grandfather had to get this from somewhere. He had to at least see one. But likely he was around somebody using one. This is like my wife's flower. It's another instance of going back through time till there's Ugg in the cave with stone tools. Here's another one, which is different. I would say dramatically different. For one, let me go to the graphic. There's this giant white space in the center. Empty. I don't like the term empty spaces. All space is informative. But there's no tools in the middle. They're crowded around the perimeter. This reminds me of my first high school dance, where everybody was along the wall, and no one wanted to go out where there might actually be some activity. It's a kind of, it's tentative, and perhaps even timid. So, whenever I do this at conferences, and maybe there's not enough here, somebody will yell, well, maybe it is just short. Yeah. Well, a couple things about that. One, there are pipe wrenches that are the most elevated object, and they're the heaviest thing. So, maybe they're just not wise about heavy things falling. I don't know. But also, that, on one hand, there's this need to reduce people to being entirely pragmatic. And we're not. We're really, really not. We're not logical. We're not coldly objective. Not everything we do is explicitly for the thing that we think or we're saying that we do. Otherwise, we'd all dress the same. We would all be completely functional in some kind of synthetic jumpsuit or something, I don't know. But we're not. We are inherently self-expressive in everything. Everything that we do informs about us. Another thing that tells me that this is not just a case of physiology is the title. I took this from Flickr. I use all of these images from Flickr. And the title of this one is something like, Slowly Building a Real Workbench Like Bob's, which implies that this person understands that they're taking baby steps towards becoming a master of a genre. Here's someone who is not a master of a genre. This is entirely a purchase. It's as if they went out one day with a credit card and they bought everything. I want a workbench, and so I bought a workbench, and then I bought, well, I might need one of those. In terms of organizing this visual information, these tools, the saws don't face the same way. One is vertical, one is horizontal. They still have their paper protective thing on them. Objects are not grouped by function, so the two rubber mallets, just in case you break the first one, they're not near each other. There doesn't seem to be really any cogent attempt to put all the tools on the pegboard, even though in Photoshop I move these around and you can arrange them all quite logically so that they all fit. This is an amateur, this is a beginner rather, in the genre practice of writing their life, their identity, and their community in manipulating these tools. Does that make sense? Here's one in contrast. I like this quote because he's actually talking about people who hang around that place, horse tracks. My father was an inveterate gambler, especially on horses. And he was the kind of person who hung around horse tracks. He was that sort of character. So this is not just writing. I would say that this applies to art as well. If you're the kind of person who if you hang around art, you're going to become the kind of person who hangs around art and art making and writing. This is the genre master. Because not only is there this great attention to organizing tools by function and by shape, and considerations of symmetry, contrast, proximity, all the Gestalt principles are there. The tools themselves and their arrangement are actually the work produced by the tools. You can see an example of this in this cross and square shape. This is a visual composition that speaks to the person's mastery of what they do, and also their mastery at arranging information that informs everybody, this is who I am, and this is the work that I do, and these are the people with whom I belong. Am I still making sense? You're not too sure, you're kind of... And I have my poor little, store-bought workbench down there by contrast. Because that's just the beginning. That's just recognizing that there's this thing I can participate in, and it's visually informative. And then there's somebody who says, yes, come into my world, I'll show you. So these are also what I call heuristics, which are really rough systems for learning. So while this is not a masterful display of tool placement information, this is pretty old. This could actually be a way for, say, apprentices to learn about tools, their trade, their application, their relationship to one another, and to become part of a trade-like practice of putting things back where they belong, which is also what workbenches are about. So another thing that I look at are workplace cubicles. And if you thought garages were ugly, well, this is going to get much worse. The cubicle itself is reductive of the human spirit. When we take a job, many of us, if you're a student, you don't have a job yet, well, this is what awaits you. You are assigned a space, and you are assigned one of these. And the moment you log on to one of these, you become what? You worker. Yes. Which is to say, different than what you were before. And these cubicles often are famous for being barren of visual information. There's nothing in them. So, and in fact, they're like that for a purpose. Because according to this fellow, who is the developer of what we understand to be the cubicle, cubicles arrange reality for us. They're telling us, yes, you're this worker. And this is the world. And in fact, the world kind of disappears when you walk in. Who you were before no longer applies because those visual things that remind you of who you are, your flower arrangement, your tool workbench, is gone. They're gone. So what people do is they bring in their own stuff. And some claim that this is a kind of nostalgia, or this is just sort of, because I love my nephew Bobby and I want to be reminded of him. This is resistance, I would say. This is resistance to another kind of writing, another kind of composition that's being imposed on people who work in cubicles. And the focus of the resistance in these cubicles is often this monitor. Because proximity to the monitor, these shapes, these images, these colors, these objects, they begin to slowly intrude on that space. And the degree to which that space, this dominating shape that represents the work that we do and ourselves as workers, is challenged by what we introduce into the cubicle space. Still making sense? Okay. On the other hand, there are people who are totally immersed in that environment. They're not necessarily resistant, but are rather have buried their lone personal reminder, their personal compositions here behind cups, styrofoam cups, and a plethora of monitors, 4 monitors, because one is not enough. You can't just dominate one. So some people are happy in that. Others are not so much. I think when you put Garfield on your monitor, you are actually really making a very bold declaration about work and about your relationship to that space, and how we need to carve that space into something that is about us, actually. And here is the corresponding genre master to that person with the woodworking tools. I identify this person as a graphic artist because there used to be one. There's a self-healing mat. There's the nifty monitor. This is not resistance. This is very much like that woodworking space, because this person is making their tools the actual art that they produce. So their environment is reflective of them in the way that my wife's flower arrangement is reflective of them. So all of these objects are functioning much like words, if you will, because they have a particular semantic relationship. Those birds on a wire and their spatial relationship is informative. Just like, say, the words and letters in I love you are spatially informative. If you put those all together, it's not quite the same. Try it on somebody that you love. Just write I love you. It's not the same. So, that's my stuff. From this, I understand that people arrange the material world in recurrent and visually meaningful ways. So really, there are these intersections between alphabetic writing and between visual composition and many kinds of visual arts. And this is one of them. This is a kind of writing, I think, that it's like shadow writing. It's something that we do. We assign meaning to objects and we arrange them in meaningful ways without actually having to think about it a lot. But it's operating in parallel with our other more formal communicative practices. I'm going to strike a pose of it.
Sorry.
I don't know. I ever signed something. And so I understand these arrangements as both writing and visual composition. In everyday life, these compositions declare attributes, display social connections, contribute to learning, and can be used to resist systemic power. The thing about those genres that I was talking about, we are assigned genres. If you go to work in one of those cubicles, you work with certain genres. The person who is your supervisor or director, they work with different genres. If you want to start a fuss, try working in their genres and see what happens. They're territorial. In Australia, they have a their educational system is very oriented towards social justice, and they recognize explicitly the power of genre in education and in writing education. So students are explicitly taught to write in a number of genres, span genres, which is a really wonderful idea because it enables them to move more fluidly and participate more fully in society. Except somebody gets to pick the genres. Visual compositions are produced by human action. This is stuff that we do. We are active in this. My wife is active in arranging flowers, and I'm inactive in passively watching. And we do this in semi-private and public spaces. This is gross, but I must tell you, I also look at chewing gum on sidewalks. because I did my graduate work at a giant Big Ten university. When you walk up to the library, it starts about 150 feet out, the little spatterings of chewing gum. And then when you get up to the door, it's just really, it covers almost everything, all the concrete harassment. Despite wastebaskets and ashtray stands being in proximity, you'll see a little bit of gum in those, but mostly it's on the ground. So there's this practice where people either going in or out of the building expectorate gum. They spit it out. This is so weird. We don't really think about it because it just sort of happens incrementally, and then this stuff builds up, like bird guano or something. But if all of those people assembled at the same time and spit out gum at the same time, now that would be an event. That would really freak us out, wouldn't it? There is some kind of strange social composition that happens in some public spaces where we understand that we make this mark, those marks accrue and develop and turn into something. It's a very odd kind of non-authorial writing, yet there is a kind of shared understanding about this practice. Because anyone who spits out a piece of gum, they know on some level it's not going away. It hits the ground and it becomes their narrative on the ground, and somebody steps on it and they're a participant in that narrative, and maybe it ends up on another shoe 100 feet down the sidewalk. But we are leaving bits of ourselves in meaningful ways. So is that gross? No? I didn't show any pictures. Those are really gross. Well, that's what I have. Does anyone have any questions? I promise that if this is not a good thing, I'd give $1. Anybody want $1? Yes.
I just have one thought, the big garage,
Yes.
I kill for garage like that.
Oh, yeah.
But you know how they're arranged, did it ever occur to you that it's an accountant or an engineer that does places like that?
That it's tied to someone's profession?
Yeah, those are the kind of people that do those things.
If you hang out in a certain kind of place, you become the person,
That's right.
kind of person who hangs out in that place.
Which is why parents tell their teenagers to be careful with whom they
You hang
hang
around with, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't listen to that because the people they want me to hang around with were the most interesting ones. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how I would make that connection because I'm an unwelcome intruder in this space. I'm not actually going to people's homes and looking at things, and I'm I'm surmising a great deal. But I have looked at thousands, so I suppose. Anybody else? Is this worth hanging out for? You look like you're dying.
I think it's fascinating for people.
Oh.
I'm
It's
thinking about
heartbreaking.
what my office space looks like. I don't know what that reflects on.
Will you change it now?
I don't fly. I'm not sure.
I don't know that we can.
Right,
You know,
I think that's the exact same, it is who I am.
Yeah.
It's a reflection of.
Yeah, but I think none of us are static, that we change all the time. And I think that space changes, which is why there's times we walk into our space and go, God, I just have to do something like this. This is right. And so we do. We change.
But then it comes back to the way it was.
It comes back a lot like it, but we're never quite the same, you know?
Not, yeah, right.
Anything else?
Just the thought, the story of the flower arranging and the need to carry on the legacy of her
Yes.
history. Friend Sylvia and her mother and father used to make Christmas cookies around about Thanksgiving. Her mother died, she and her father still continued that. Her father died, she still continued it and then was worried about it dying. So she brought in some children from a depressed part of the community, little girls, and she began to do the Christmas cookies with little girls. It was for the little girls, of course, but it was really for her as well, to continue the story, to continue to build the legacy, and then to pass it on. She had no children of her own. She didn't want that practice to die when she did, so
But
she continued.
it's a practice, but it's also kind of writing because there's an artifact produced, a particular artifact. That's beautiful. The same thing happens when people want to pass on ethnic recipes, especially in my family, because my mother and aunts would make this stuff, and my sisters know how, kind of, and I know even less. It's not the same, and it's too much work. You can just go buy it, you know? But it's that same thing, like, who do we give this to? It'll just disappear. So will some important part. Ask me something really hard now.
How do you recommend this for educators and museums, to put students through this practice?
I saw this wonderful, and I cannot recall the artist's name, but he's an African-American artist, and I saw an exhibition in Savannah, which is near where I work. He would combine an image, photographic image of someone with a particular, very old object. And so he'd have these objects scattered around, and one of his subjects would come in and he'd pick out the thing that called to them. And he would hang these side by side. And so you would construct a narrative about this person and that object, even though, boxing gloves, that person may have never boxed in their life. But part of that exhibit was in the visual learning space with students. They would hang particular objects on a wall, and then students would draw little representations of themselves on stickies and put their representations near the object that spoke to them, or for which they had an affinity or an interest. So we'd see these constellations of compositions around particular everyday objects. That's fascinating. Something like that. Does that kind of...
Yeah, I work with a lot of Mexican communities, so
Yes.
a lot of them want to share that story. A lot of them want to document it, especially parents migrating from Mexico.
Yeah. And those artifacts, there are artifacts distinct to that community. And in that space that I was talking about with children, there were, one of the objects was a rosary. And there are obviously some Latino schools represented in that display. So, yeah. Anything else? Yes, sir.
This is a comment, I suppose, or a different relationship. So I work in the internet space, so I know a lot about that. And so in the digital space, when you look at platforms like Pinterest versus Facebook, a lot of people are starting to talk about this new notion. There's actually a guy, Stephen Anderson, he talks about from paths to sandboxes. And the things we used to create were much like paths. We had predefined tools, predefined way you use something. Everyone had to use it that same way. It's very structured. When you look at Pinterest, people can save pictures, but of any kind of thing. They can create their own collection, so they can be different. Same tool, but the toolbox, the platform is very more open to people to use it the way they want. And I think that's interesting that there's sort of not necessarily a trend, but we don't know what the next social platform will be. But there is sort of a trend to saying, let's let people make more of what they want of it, because then they can better express and use it in whatever way they want. You can use it in a professional way, you can use it in a creative way, you can use it anyhow you want. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting.
The digital space complicates this because while we can find our own paths, what Bachelor would call paths of desire, you know, where people cut across the lawn because it doesn't make any sense to do a right angle on the sidewalk. We can do that with applications, but many of them are overdetermined. Facebook is overdetermined. There is no space to really write in Facebook. It's a form that we fill out. They tell us where our picture's going to go. It's just, you know, the no end. I don't want my picture there. I don't want just a landscape thing. Sometimes I want it like that. Why can't I have it like that? Just a picture like that. So I think it's difficult to resist that, really. Every day is becoming increasingly populated by the digital. In fact, there's kind of an alternate digital everyday life that we inhabit. And so there's an analog kind of existence, and then so much of our time is spent in that digital realm. I used to play World of Warcraft for a long time, until I got tired of 12-year-olds telling me that I sucked. But they're right. But there are opportunities in gaming to do things in the environment, to structure it in certain ways. But I don't think that we have enough agency within that realm yet to do that. And so it worries me when, you know, there are hegemonic things like Google and Microsoft and even Apple, I use Apple stuff, but who really want to direct us in very kind of constraining ways.
Well, we live in a commerce society, so
Yeah.
it's not free. Nothing exists out there for free. So somehow money needs to be transacted, and that's where you get constrained. But there is sort of a trend to at least have the community of creators think about more open spaces where people can make what they want of it.
A really good example of that is MySpace. So MySpace was this horrible, wonderful, messy, worst website thing ever. Then it got kind of creepy, or very creepy. And it's come back. It's not the same thing. It's more like a music and social media platform, kind of. But there's still more latitude in there than there is in Facebook. And those kinds of things. But yeah, Pinterest, certainly. Anything else I can say, tell? I know one shadow animal. Yeah.
Yeah.
How are you at time?
Just right.
Okay. Well, there are these forums, you know, where you can duplicate what 12-year-olds would say about me in World of Warcraft. But thank you very much.
Thank you.